on to introducing our topic, that's understanding and building pathways to inclusive animal advocacy in India. These are the 6 objectives that we are going to be exploring and discussing today: educating ourselves and others about the concept of speciesism, simple language, and various dialects; understanding and educating on intersections of animal rights movement with other social justice movement and ways to build allyship; working in animal rights movement through social, cultural, media, and legal lenses; finding a middle ground with diverse perspectives within the movement and working towards a common goal of animal liberation; resources that can be developed on these issues for activists and volunteers and other animal advocates to educate themselves on the nuances of the animal rights movement; and lastly, a solution-focused approach that can draw potential projects and or initiatives that can be incorporated on the ground. We have our panelists today. We have Ankur Dedam. Ankur uses he and him pronouns. Ankur is a writer and content creator from Nagpur. He has been advocating for animal rights since he turned vegan in 2019. Ankur hails from a Dalit community, one of the marginalized communities in India. He runs a page called Dalit Vegan, where he draws parallels between oppression, marginalized humans and non-human animals and their rights. In his writing, he explores various topics such as casteism, speciesism, and ableism, their intersections, and misinformation with regard to animal rights. Another panelist we have is Devrati. Devrati uses pronouns they, them. Devrati is a non-binary, queer, feminist, anti-speciesist advocate. They run Brown Feminist Vegan digital source and content bank on veganism, anti-speciesism, and the intersections with social justice. Professionally, they work in the feminist nonprofit sector with communities of women, queer, and trans persons on digital resilience building. Welcome, Devrati, and welcome, Ankur. We have Namrata. Thank you, Ankur. We have Namrata here with us. Namrata uses she, her pronouns. Namrata has over 18 years of experience in public relations with expertise in media outreach, advocacy, communication, and crisis management. Prior to Prakriti, Namrata worked with reputed public relations firms like IPAN, Hill and Knowlton Strategies, and PR Pundit, and as a director for client servicing for Footprint Global Communications. Over the course of her career, she has managed sectors and clients in social development and public health, federations of Indian animal protection organizations, that's FIAPO, Sambodhi Research, Digital Green, Adventures Beyond Barriers Foundation, Save the Children, PATH, Plan India, Akshar Patra, Education, Startups, Media, Retail, and Consumer Durables. Namrata has also co-conducted several workshops in crisis communication and preparedness, key message development, and media training. We have Sanchita. Welcome, Sanchita. Sanchita uses she and her pronouns. Sanchita is a freelance journalist from India. Her writings focus on issues surrounding speciesism, animal rights, and casteism. Currently, she's a student of advertising and public relations at Indian Institute of Mass Communication, New Delhi. She's also interested in studying the ways in which human perceptions and opinions get formed and molded through media, in particular advertising and news. Welcome, Sanchita. Sanchita is a 27-year-old writer and occasional journalist from Silchar, Assam. Sanchita uses pronouns they and them. Sanchita has been an anti-speciesist since 2019, and their areas of interest largely revolves around the intricacies of speciesism and capital. They have also worked in animal rescue for a while, mostly under a local organization named Wild and Free. We have Manisha Singh. Manisha uses she and her pronouns. Welcome, Manisha, to the panel. Manisha has 22 years of diverse experience across operations, research, entrepreneurship, and campaigning in the corporate world and civil society. She has led several movement-building initiatives for animal advocacy in India. Her past assignments have endorsed the strong belief in the power of collaboration and building strong grassroots movements in order to change existing narratives and cause systemic transformation. She dreams of an ethical green planet in which all species live sustainably. Thank you so much for each one of you to be here, take out the time, and have this discussion that's very much needed. And I now give you the stage and let you take over the panel discussion. And we will start with the first objective today. I'm just going to off my screen. All right. So we start with the session, and the first objective for today is educating ourselves and others about the concept of speciesism in simple language and various dialects.
Shall I go ahead?
Yes, please, Sanjit.
So to explain what speciesism is in simple words, it is just a form of oppression that is based on the belief that we humans are superior, morally superior, or overall superior to non-human animal species, which further forms and even justifies our oppressive, exploitative, and dominant behaviors against them, towards them. And not just that, speciesism can also be it is also about our differential treatment of different animals. For example, in many parts of the world, animals like dogs and cats are considered animals who are supposed to be taken care of, who are supposed to be kept as companion animals or pets. They are they deserve to be cared for every time, and that is not held true for animals. For instance, animals were typically farmed, like pigs, cows, buffaloes. They are seen worthy of being used in different ways for human interests. So that is what speciesism is all about. Over to you. Would anyone else like to add on to it?
I would like to go next. Am I audible?
Yes, please, Sanjita.
Yeah, you are.
So adding on to what Sanchita said, speciesism is as much of a structural problem as the patriarchy or casteism. And I think the easiest way to understand speciesism, in my opinion, is, when people bring up racism or misogyny, we don't try to go for reductionist approaches where, okay, fine, a little bit of misogyny is fine, as long as it's human, and they're not suffering. Obviously, nobody tries to say that, but when it comes to animals, we take a speciesist approach. We go, okay, animals can have a good life, but one bad day, that is like an acceptable way to go about dismantling speciesism, according to some people.
Kan ditambah itu
Can I please request everyone to keep themselves on mute while others are speaking? Sorry, Sanjita, please go ahead.
Okay, so yeah, as I was saying, adding on to what Sanchita said, speciesism is as much of a structural problem as misogyny and patriarchy and capitalism are. And speciesism is to be handled as radically as we handle misogyny or patriarchy. I think one of the easiest ways to understand speciesism, as Gary Francione has said, is, when we try to tackle issues of racism or casteism, we don't give reductionist approaches like, okay, fine, a little bit of casteism, if it's good for everybody, is fine. As long as they're not suffering that much, it's okay. You can be a little casteist. So nobody says that kind of approach is not acceptable, as it should not be. But when it comes to animals, we see people perpetuating the idea of animal welfare. As long as the exploitation is humane, as long as non-human animals have a good life and one bad day, where they're like happy and suddenly they're like slaughtered. So this approach, this animal welfare approach, is also a form of speciesism. And we must understand that speciesism is an extremely pervasive structure, and it is present in the way we perceive animals, the depersonalization of animals, in the way we speak about them, in the ways we think about them. So yeah, that's what speciesism is to me.
Bharati, you wanted to go next?
Just to add to
what's been said already. I think in talking about what speciesism is, I feel it's also important to understand this in the larger sense of like how the lives, bodies, and rights of non-human animals, they don't exist in vacuum, and how like the same or similar power structures and systems of inequalities work to oppress both human and non-human animals. So besides like understanding the concept itself, I think a holistic understanding of speciesism is also about recognizing these intersections. Like for example, if we talk about capitalism, how it thrives on commodifying human and non-human animal bodies and lives for profit, or like Sanchita was talking about casteism, how many Dalit vegan activists and vegans of marginalized castes, they share their experiences and talk about how ideas around purity, for example, they impact both human and non-human animals. Or we have vegans with disabilities who are talking about experiences of ableism and the interconnections with non-human animals' experience of oppression. So, but many of us also realize how like the mainstream vegan movement, both in the country and globally, they often, it doesn't very often see these intersections, and unfortunately it like tends to operate in silos in its understanding of speciesism. And that is also because um, the loudest voices around are those of people with privilege. And whenever there is a voice of somebody of a marginalized identity talking about their perspective of veganism or speciesism, there are both like vegans and non-vegans with privilege who are drowning their voices. So I feel like the mainstream narrative around veganism is not even anti-speciesist in its core, and it becomes more around like a consumer activity or like a food issue instead of being a stance against speciesism or anti-oppression. And it's very like single issue where this continuum of oppression is not acknowledged, where like speciesism is not even the main focus. So I feel it's very important to talk about speciesism, how these systems of oppression, and as a result also individual actions of discrimination, they work to harm non-human animals who are experiencing some of the longest standing oppressions, right? And I feel it's also important to like demystify these ideas and listen to marginalized experiences within the vegan movement. And I feel that's how we really learn and unlearn ideas that we have about non-human animals. And something that I try to continuously also learn is how to talk about these issues in ways that are relatable. Like on Brown Feminist Vegan, I am still learning like how to make content in simple forms. It can be explainers or images that don't throw people off, and talking about the very basics to like the more complex political ideological understandings. And like one of my favorite authors, Silko, says that speciesism or like these conversations around speciesism, they're not supposed to be some sort of a very complex or like intellectual activity. And like caring about animal rights and caring about questioning oppression is like really very fundamental to any change that we envision within the vegan movement.
Thank you so much, Debrati, Sanjita, and Sanjita, for sharing your thoughts. Anybody else would like to add their points? Or Amrita, Alicia?
Sure, can I go ahead? So just carrying forward from what Devrati just said is that I feel that as an animal rights activist or welfare, community, it's there is a lot that is happening within the community, but I think there is it's sort of separate from the rest of the world. So that merging is not happening, and there are a lot of fence sitters that are there in the general public but there is a lack of language to actually talk to them in. And the holding of the community is a little, I would say it's a little absent at the moment, because probably everything is very new. What we need to actually do to understand speciesism much better is to actually, exactly how she said, it has to be done in relatable terms. You have to give perspective which is relate. We have to speak in the language that the general populace actually understands, because this is a say. I mean, we have to look at it from a point of view, and I think somebody did mention this, that the gender movement that was there and where it has come today, there is a great shift that has happened. And obviously it took time, and we need to actually read into how that happened and apply the successes of those movements into the animal rights movement. And it is very important to actually equip the mass, the people who, at least the fence sitters or who are interested in actually standing up for the rights of the animals, to have the language to do it in. So I think, whether we do it from, and I'm obviously, because I come from the media industry, through social media and media, we need to give, it in a way, it's support language that is there for people to actually even put their point across. So I'm talking about even a group of friends where the conversation is happening, why we should not be consuming, or whatever it might be about, whether it is about veganism or rights, or even for that matter for stray animals. That conversation really needs to have, people need to be equipped with the responses that are required. So there's a lot of information dissemination that is required.
Thank you, Namrata. That's a great point. Anybody else would want to go ahead? Nisha?
Yeah, so thank you, to everybody who spoke before. I think it's a great building up that's happening over this entire question, because from understanding ourselves about speciesism to how do we make others understand them, and then about the dialects, right? That was the objective. So I think language plays a very, very important role. I will just build on what Namrata said a little while back. Because even when we are talking about this, how many times have we used human, non-human? So we are saying, and people have commented on it. Now, is that the right way to do it? Possibly, yes, because, we are trying to establish some level of understanding, but is it really the perspective we would want to build? Because speciesism is inherent in that usage, right? So because you're saying you're putting one species, a human species, versus all other species, a non-human species, which also seems to be propagating the egoistic model that we all want to move away from, and possibly move to that whole egocentric, every species has a role to play in the ecosystem kind of place that we all want to move to. So sometimes there are limitations even with the best of our intentions. And what is important, and I think what is really healthy, is that we are today, all of us, discussing this. In a little while back, intersectionality was supposed to be not a great word to be used in animal rights circles. There was a lot of debate that was happening, a lot of divisive groups that had formed on the basis of this. So even to have a session where we are talking about it, and I don't think we are there yet. I agree with Sanchita. There's a lot that needs to be done with Namrata as well. And we need to evolve this together. We don't have the answers yet. Just a quick point on what Namrata also mentioned about the feminist movement being like a beacon of hope for us. I agree, it's a beacon of hope. At the same time, let's also look at it a little more critically. Because when I was trying to do some research some months back, and I don't think the situation would have changed in a few months, what I realized is that a lot of articles, now I don't have the research and the data to prove this, but I'm just going by, opinions of people I respect. And a lot of them seem to think that even in the West, the feminist movement has benefited primarily white, women who are more privileged. They are able-bodied women, they are middle-class women, they're educated women. And the rest of the women seem to have been left off, even in the feminist movement. what lessons does that hold for us in the animal rights movement? How do we, ensure that even as we look at wins, this happens to everybody across all the isms that, that are intersecting, right? So I think understanding speciesism is also about understanding the whole aspect about identities, about how we as individuals, and I'm introducing that term now at this point, because I think we cannot have a discussion without exploring that. So as an individual, I have different identities. I am currently a very privileged person who's been raised in a privileged background. I'm educated, I have the privilege of a lot of things. And I also commit blunders on a day-to-day basis in spite of being, I would say, informed about it. And I'm continuously learning, right? So, but then there are many of us who are not even aware, and many of us who have the same background as I do, a background of privilege, and we are not even aware. And we bring all of that, all of these complex things in which we are raised into animal rights, and we talk about speciesism. And in many ways, without even knowing about it, without being aware of what we are doing, we propagate those things as we are anti-speciesist, as we are, anti-speciesist in our approach. So how do we build that understanding? How do we build this common language that is not anti-speciesist, that is very, very inclusive of other movements, that helps us become more effective? So we are not landing into a place where we are looking back and saying, oh my God, what have we done? We propagated some forms of oppression while fighting against another. So I'll just rest, with that.
Stay, Brati.
Thanks, Manisha, for raising that point about language. It's also something that I have thought about a lot. And like language is something that is constantly evolving, and there are like so many different interesting perspectives. So just had like a small thought to share, like on using the human, non-human sort of language. So it's not like an absolute parallel to draw, but like, for example, I use non-human like I use non-binary to describe myself, where more than like centering the binary, it's like a rejection of binary standards. And in the same way, like using non-human can be a rejection or a questioning of human standards and the human status quo that continues to harm non-human animals. So like, it's really interesting to me how there are such different perspectives around language, and it's a continuous like a learning process. So thanks for that.
Thank you, Brati. Thank you, Manisha. Ankur, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, just one more thing on language. So like when we talk about, the majority of people advocate veganism is the way, kindness and compassion language. And I think that's kind of speciesist and also casteist, because like it assumes that, the vegetarian population is already, kind and compassionate, and that all they need to do is, extend that already present kindness and compassion towards animals. And it also assumes that the people who are like non-vegetarian, like Dalits and Adivasis, like people from marginalized communities, they don't have that kindness and compassion. So yeah, in terms of language, I think we need a better language than kindness and compassion.
And adding on to what Ankur said about this language thing, and how vegetarians or pure vegetarians in India are seen as more compassionate, or people who are more kind to animals. Well, we need to understand that vegetarianism doesn't work in the same way in India as it works in the Western world. And it has very little, like the cultural vegetarianism that we see in India, it has very little to do with compassion to animals or the intent to care for them. And this is where I would like to introduce the idea of caste speciesism that even I was introduced to by fellow animal rights and Dalit rights advocate Prateek Kumar Gautam. So this is about how caste system classifies and divides not only us humans, but it also divides animals into different categories or jatis. And we all know how what casteism is like over here. And in this hierarchy, Brahmins are considered the purest, while the Dalits are seen as impure, polluting, and dirty, especially signifying the work that has been forced upon them, like works like sanitation, discarding the carcasses of animals, and working in tanneries, in leather factories. And it's also like how certain animals like the cows, they have been elevated to high caste status, and even their urine and dung are used to purify those surfaces or places that have been polluted by the people who are considered untouchables, and even animals who are considered untouchables, like pigs are seen dirty and polluting. And what caste speciesism does is that it keeps the caste system intact and very much prevalent by making certain communities, the marginalized communities, so to say, more dependent on the oppression and exploitation of non-human animals. Like I said, how the so-called dirty and unhygienic tasks are better kept and reserved for people from the Dalit communities. And Pratik also, I think in one of his articles, he also mentioned how even the parts of these animals are meant for different castes, and how a milk is considered something so pure that is supposed to be used by upper castes like Brahmins and all. And it's when the cow dies, when the animal dies, the animal is supposed to be discarded by the Dalits. So when the animal dies, it becomes impure, and hence the so-called impure castes must come and take care of the mess. And not just that, it's like the countless numbers of cows, bulls, chickens, pigs, and elephants. They die serving different purposes for different caste groups. So it's not just the cow that is whose individuality is being exploited by certain caste groups, not certain caste groups, let's say the dominant caste groups in India, where they even where they express that they care for the cow, and hence they call her the mother, and therefore justifies taking away her milk and other products. But when the cow becomes useless or they die, Dalits are expected to clean it all or pick up their carcasses. And what caste speciesism also does is that it maintains this tradition of linking certain foods with a certain community as a means to further marginalize the already oppressed and vulnerable caste communities in India. So that's all about it for now. Over to you, Sneha.
I just wanted to add on the kindness and compassion bit raised by Ankur and Sanchita. It's that I personally believe, in fact, I think it is right to not use the kindness and compassion that we're, doing animals a kindness and compassion by not killing them, because it's not kindness or compassion to not kill somebody. It's literally the basic bare minimum. It's justice. It's our moral duty to not harm and abuse animals the way we do. And adding on to the caste speciesism bit, I also want to bring up the fact that veganism is often conflated with Brahmanical vegetarianism. And I and many other Dalit and Bahujan vegans and animal activists maintain that veganism and anti-speciesism actually is fundamentally against the idea of Brahmanism. An ideology which is built to subjugate and oppress and classify people into less than groups can never be in conjunction with a movement that is meant to shake the fundamental idea of what it means to be, what it means to have moral value. So it's very important that we maintain that veganism and anti-speciesism is fundamentally anti-Brahmanical.
Especially when it comes to this whole narrative that is there in our country, very much active since the last few years, that the cow is supposed to be protected, and it's used as a justification. It's also used as a justification to exploit her further. for her milk. Like, she is our mother and she's holy, so she produces pure milk. And there's also this problem within the vegan movement where Savarna vegans, they think that it's important to bring up how Hindu vegetarianism works, because it is something that has a lot to do with benevolence to animals, which is not true, by the way. And even since recently, an organization that a very popular organization that works for animal welfare and animal rights. One of its co-founders posted a video, and Sanchayita and Ankur, we were discussing about it yesterday on a chat on Instagram. And basically in that video, that person just said that the aim of vegans and cow vigilantes in India is the same, that is to protect or save the cows. And therefore they should be coming together to work for it, because currently the methods in which they work for it is different. And I think that's so problematic, because considering how veganism is already seen as an extension of Hindu vegetarianism, and people who are such popular voices of veganism and animal rights in India are doing the same, and they are going ahead with saying that Gorakshaks and vegan activists should be coming together and work together. And I think, this is coming from a place of not understanding how cow politics actually functions in India. I don't think that person has any ill intent behind it. I just think that, just like several other vegans in India, even these people, this person is not really able to understand that cow protection, how it is in India, doesn't really have to do with actually, caring for the cow. And veganism, in its true anti-species sense, it completely dismantles this idea of treating an animal like cow as superior to other animals. It just sees veganism sees cows as first and foremost as individuals, and not like a mother who we are supposed to make use of for taking away her milk. Yeah, over to you. I think Sanchayita had to say something, or someone raised their hand.
Thank you, Sanchita. Yeah, so-
Irrespective of the fact that if that person has ill intent or not, like their ignorance still is dangerous, and that is the issue with Savarna veganism, that they try to keep politics separate from veganism, but like that's not how it works. You cannot keep politics separate from animal rights. You have to be politically aware. You have to know these things, how cow vigilantism is fundamentally different from veganism and animal rights activism.
Yeah, I think there's this perception among even Savarna vegans that human rights should not be like human rights and animal rights cannot exist together. So it's not something that just the people who are not all about animal rights think like that. But even within the animal rights movement, I have seen several people who think that we should not be raising these concerns. We should not be talking about politics when we are talking about animal rights. And I just don't know how it works. Like, how can we not talk about how the waste system is so heavily dependent on animals, is making it more is making certain communities more dependent on them, and that they do not even have any choice to go for ways that do not involve animals. Does anyone else have to add anything?
Well, thank you, Sanchita, Ankur, and everybody for the amazing points and participation. I think we can move on to the second point. While I think there's a lot of overlap that has already happened in the first point, there are some discussion points that came up that's related to the second objective, that's understanding and educating on the intersections of animal rights movement with other social justice movements, and ways to build allyship with each other. So if anybody would like to expand more on this building allyship with other social justice movements, that would be really great. Yes, Devrati, thank you.
Yeah, so like we've already been saying, like it's not meaningful if the movement works in a vacuum and if it is single issue. Like just like any other movement, right? Like feminism cannot work if it does not have space for queer and trans voices, or the queer movement can't be meaningful if Dalit, Bahujan, Adivasi, queer and trans persons are not allowed to occupy these spaces. And that is when movements become like they reach a dead end and they become alienating for so many people. And then it's hard for the movement to meaningfully challenge any oppression that they are seeking to fight. So I feel allyship becomes really important, and allyship or being allies is it's like a word that is thrown about so loosely. So I feel a lot of us also need to like reconsider how we are looking at meaningful allyship and think about, is there really space in the vegan movement where um, agency, autonomy, things like choices of non-human animals are recognized? Or is it seen like a consumer activity, a food issue, or a health issue, which, like some of us have said, it borderlines on ideas of purity, that like, oh, eating animals is dirty, or their bodily secretions are gross, and consuming them makes you impure, or like health issues, like if you go vegan, you will lose weight, right? So if this is our approach towards animal rights, then we are not really allies to non-human animals in their struggle. And unfortunately, this kind of approach is like it's really prominent in so many vegan spaces, which is this is like it's beyond problematic. It's just straight up harmful. And we have seen so many vegans of so many marginalized identities themselves exit so many of these spaces because they didn't find any form of allyship between veganism and other movements that are also very integral to their lives. And it also works like the other way around, where movements for human issues, they totally refuse to see speciesism even as a real issue, as like an issue about having complete autonomy over one's body, life, reproductive health. And they don't recognize how like this system of oppression, this works in a continuum and marginalizes human and non-human animals who are not allowed to make choices or have a say over their own lives. So yeah, I feel like these common understandings across movements is like it's very necessary for any form of holistic or meaningful change, and also to rethink how we look at allyship to begin with.
Yes, Sanjay, please go ahead.
So as per allyship, I want to bring up what Ankur had said, that many people try to separate politics from anti-speciesism. And as we all know, every single movement that we have spoken about till now, feminism, anti-racism, anti-casteism, they've all been political. They've all been related to legislation. They've all been related to social change. And a similar approach has to be taken with anti-speciesism. The reason I believe that the leadership of the global and Indian vegan movement is so, for lack of better words, inept, is because they've tried to separate politics from a political issue. The usage of animals, the indiscriminate mass scale exploitation of animals with regard to capital, these are all political issues. And unless we target it in a way which is political, we will not be able to do much. We will have to examine how these various political issues intersect with each other. And in fact, with what I just said about politics, the state especially plays a huge role into that. Organizations which want to take like a direct action to dismantling speciesism, they get labeled as terrorists. Why? Because the state has interest in protecting animal like capital. So I believe, speciesism is a political issue and it must be treated as a political issue. And when we speak about intersecting it with other social justice movement, its importance should be on par with those movements as well. We cannot recenter animals from what is like speciesism is in interest to animals, and we cannot move them away from the center. We must keep them in the center. Their interests, their rights, their right to live, we must try to preserve that. That's all from me.
Thank you, Sanchayita. Anybody else would like to raise their points?
Yes, I think unless we continue to push veganism as like bring up veganism in its true anti-species sense, it will just cease to it is just going to be seen as just like consumer activity, like Devarati pointed out several times. Like even when we do a simple Google search, veganism or vegans, the news headlines that we come across has to do with a celebrity just trying out a plant-based diet, a celebrity turned vegan, or they tried veganism for a week, or just check out these elite vegan cafes. And it rarely has to do with the representation of what animals are made to go through, and how we need to really be concerned about them, instead of just bringing up how check out this cafe, check out this vegan cafe, or check out this exclusive vegan product. So I think even till date, animals are not presented fairly in news and other media. Yes, Sanchayita, over to you. You have raised your hand.
Sanchayita was clapping it, supporting the point, I guess. Yeah. Anybody else would like to add? Yeah. Yes, Manish. Yes, Manish. Please go ahead.
Yeah, so just speaking about, I wanted to also talk about, I was talking about identities earlier and how we, it's complex, right? So even doing this work is complex. And I think a lot of the times, at least in my experience, so I went vegan in 2014. And I've been active, I've been an activist. I used to do animal rescue before, et cetera, et cetera. So I've seen many different sides of the movement. And I'm just speaking from my own personal experience. And I think we've translated that also into the organization now that I'm part of. A couple of us started this like-minded people, because we were looking at our impact. If we want to stand for the animals, if we want to make an actual difference, no matter how many vegan advocacy movements we've had in the country, and this beautiful, the spread of veganism, the way activists are coming together in cities across India. I mean, it's amazing to watch that. When you go for an outreach and you meet vegans, when you don't expect them, you didn't expect so many more existed, and they are surprised to find you and you're surprised to find them. And so that's really nice, how this movement is building. But if you look at the impact, I mean, impact-wise, it is still very, very marginal. We have not achieved mainstream impact. And I think Sanchayita was referring to this earlier, where she spoke about how international organizations have also, it's not just in India, I mean, even there, where is the impact? So from an impact perspective, we have to look at it. What we realized and what we are trying to do is to put it in a very systems level transformation way. Look at it holistically, look at it from many different angles, not just from the angle of individual systems of oppression, but also from climate change, from environment, from disaster management, those kind of things which intersect. When there's a disaster that happens, who looks at animals? Is the state looking at rescuing animals? Do we have in our disaster recovery management plan animals sharing any space? We don't, right? So it's only the animal welfare organizations that go and do that. I mean, when we have those kind of things happening, when animals and nature become an integral part of any policy, any change that a state, a local government, a central government is considering, then we know that we have arrived. And how do we do that? We're a little impatient about achieving this impact. We want to do it right now. We don't want to wait till next few generations, etc. So we have adopted an approach which is a little different from many organizations. First of all, we looked at where is it, of course, farm animals, right? That's the area that we have to focus on. Now, when we are looking at farm animals, what will make the maximum impact? So at Samayu, we decided that we are going to do a little bit of research. We did some research. We published 3 white papers, one on climate change, one on the role of, so it was all from an animal agriculture perspective, role of animal agriculture on climate change, on public health, and on farmers. And when we looked at how are these intersections playing out, because we live in an intersectional world, it's not to say that a system of oppression is equal to another system of oppression. Every system of oppression will have its nuances. It will have its own place. It will, and depending upon the identity you're coming from, every person's lived experience will be different, right? So it's not about that, but it's about finding out the places where all of these intersect, and the places that therefore we can commonly align, since the question is about allyship. So how do we get to that? And then we realize that we have to look at where is it that communities are suffering the most. And so if you look at the agricultural system, in agriculture, women are the ones who provide a majority of the agricultural workforce. It's a system of patriarchy that has been handed down. Men go to the cities to earn money, and women in rural India are managing all of the agricultural, whether directly on the farms or in food systems as food workers, or in other processing industries, in factories. So when we looked at this issue from that perspective, we found that definitely animal agriculture is one area which is an intersectional space for a lot of the issues that we can identify with. And also from a marginal community perspective, the farming communities in India are again largely ignored. So we looked at it from that perspective. And if you look at it from a language perspective, animals, when they're called food, they're not food, right? So that's why we decided to work in the area of food systems transformation. And that's what we are trying to do, So this is how we identified the animal agriculture being a very, very important part of it. We are still in the very initial stages. We are just about a year and a half old. We'll be a year and a half old on 30th of April. But the point that I'm trying to make is that we've also realized that as we do that, there will be a lot of conflicts. There will be conflicts within our own organization about how do we push for a rights issue when we have the legislation and litigation available for a welfare issue right now. Should we push for that welfare issue to get implemented because it's going to benefit the animals immediately? Should we focus all our energies only on long-term solutions for this? So I think it's not that we found answers. We are still, what is healthy is that we keep discussing this within the team. We keep talking about it, about where do we focus our efforts more. But what we have realized is that we have to work at all parts of this chain. We have to look at demand, we have to look at supply, we have to look at the in-betweens, and we can't ignore policy, we can't ignore governments, we can't ignore politics, like somebody said. So we don't identify with any political ideology. We consider ourselves completely apolitical, but we realize that we have to leverage what is happening in our environment, and we can't be seen as propagating a system of oppression in our work while we are saying that we are working for animals. So I just wanted to share this systems level, holistic, transformative food systems change, intersectional, multidisciplinary, multi-sectoral approach that we are taking. We have 32 partners today that work in different areas of environment, public health, climate change, social justice. And currently we did a pilot with 3 organizations who are active in the Northeast and Jharkhand, 2 of them in the Northeast and 1 in Jharkhand, where they're talking about, we bring plant-based nutritionists and dietitians to these sessions because with children, with young people, you have to be careful about your communication. So, we bring them there, we show them a documentary which is age appropriate on plant-based diets and veganism. We don't use veganism because we're focusing on moving them towards plant-based diet versus a vegan ideology at this point of time. So what we do is we show them a documentary, they see the documentary, we bring an expert on, they ask questions, and we are really pleasantly surprised by the amount of questions that the children have asked about dairy. And that to us, I think, was a win, that we are having conversations about dairy now. So I just wanted to share this. It's an exciting area for us to work in. And yeah, I think that we need to really, really treat this entire work from, it deserves a complex approach because it is complex in nature.
Thank you so much, Manisha. Yes,
Yeah.
is there...
Can I just add one more point? Sorry.
Yeah, sure.
Just on the complexity, right? So one of the things that we struggle with is really simplifying science communication to the masses. So, like we want to talk about, for example, the impact of antimicrobial, like how antimicrobial resistance is an issue which is common for both humans and for the animals, use of antibiotics, things like that. So one of the things that we are definitely, looking at is how do we make this communication more simple? How do we, and I think visual communication, powerful visual communication is something that we would want to take up in the future. Hopefully, because we think that's the solution. It bridges all barriers. You're not looking at language. How do we actually bring that about is a question that we are still trying to solve. Yeah, sorry, Sneha, please go ahead.
Please don't apologize. Completely all right. We need such passionate discussions that have been had in the whole forum that we are conducting today. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts, Manisha. I think Namrata, would you like to add anything?
More than adding anything, I actually have a few questions actually, and this is because I am not working within the animal rights community or the movement at this point in time. I am a person who's in the middle. Actually, I am just sort of designing how communication from the rights movement can reach the public. So given that, there are many times when Sanchita had mentioned that we need to have, you can't remove the politics from the animal rights movement. Yet there is limited content that we actually develop on that front. So I want to actually understand that is it possible for us to have some critical content going out to make the public see the reality of the situation? That's one, because a lot of times actually because of the situation, the political situation in the country, we refrain from going there. Recently I had actually worked on a constitutional awareness campaign, and the organization is Har Dil Mein Samvidhan, and I mean the campaign is Har Dil Mein Samvidhan, and this is what they're working on. They're going to the grassroots level and just educating people about the constitution, because people, especially in the rural areas, don't even know that there is a document that protects their rights. So what I mean to say is, even in that campaign, which is directly really political, even though we are talking about the constitution, it is so political because the need for it has been coming up now so much because of so much of oppression that has been happening. Yet that campaign did not want to take the political route at all. So we'll have to see how this is something that can be dealt with, because all of what you have said is so relevant, and it really can create stories that are so close to people in a personal capacity. And if you correlate it to the animal rights movement, that will be impactful. We just need to sort of do it in that manner, that one, it is sensitive, and how do we get our word in?
Yes, I agree. And I think instead of just copying and pasting the way vegan advocacy is done in the Western world, is not how it's going to work in the Indian context. And we need to be very conscious of how the existing class and caste context in our country. And I also wrote something about, yeah, so even the language part, Ankur and another speaker was discussing about the language thing. And I also think, there's this phrase a phrase called you are what you eat. Now, this is something that I don't think cannot be used in a very positive way in the Indian context, because over here, at least in mainland India, the oppressed communities who consume meat, especially beef, are already seen as barbarians, are seen as devils. And people who do not consume meat, or at least they do not consume beef but consume meat and other animal products, or rely on other animal products and services, are considered pure and savior, like we have already discussed about it initially. So I don't think we can just copy paste any and everything that is popular in the Western world just because we got introduced to this idea and to this term veganism outside India, from outside India. And we also, we need to, as advocates, we need to understand that this transition, that the transition that we hope for, the transition of moving from this heavily animal dependent system to a system that leaves the animals alone, is going to affect different communities differently. Like the concerns and needs of marginalized communities and vulnerable communities are going to be different than the upper class or upper caste people in India. But I think, with politics, Namrata, what I've also seen is that when we talk about politics, people are very confused with what we actually mean about politics. They usually think that if we are talking about politics, it has to do with something like, siding with a political party or with a politician. So that is also one of the reasons why I think many even animal rights advocates just like to say that, oh no, we want to stay away from politics because politics is a nasty thing, and we do not want the animal rights movement to get affected by it negatively.
Yeah.
But in some, I think just knowing and being conscious about the caste and class context that pervades in India is very important in taking the word of anti-speciesism to different levels of our society. And even the focus should not just be about turning or converting people into vegans or making them boycott animal products and services. And that is one of the major ways, and I am all up for that as a vegan. But I also think that the way that we perceive animals also needs to change, and it should not just about pushing plant-based products and the other popular vegan narratives that is there in the West. That's about it.
Thank you so much, everyone. Can we move on to the third point? I think it's quite relatable to what we are already discussing. It's working in the animal rights movement through social, cultural, media, and legal lenses. Maybe here you can elaborate on how, what could be the practical ways that we can work in each of these aspects as well.
I'm sorry, Sneha, could you please repeat the objective? I'm so sorry.
Sure. Yes, no worries, sure. So the third objective is working in the animal rights movement through social, cultural, media, and legal lenses. So maybe here we can elaborate on how we can work, in all these different aspects with animal rights in mind, with animal rights as a foundation, and work in these sectors, just like we talked about building allyship. But what are the practical ways that we can also be involved in the movement?
Okay. I think Manisha had to say something. She raised her. Sorry.
Yes, thank you. So actually, I had made a reference earlier to this whole feminist movement thing and why, how we need to be careful about replicating something as is. And we've spoken about that also, how we need a more nuanced, approach, a deeply nuanced approach in the Indian context, because we are very different from the West. We have very different political, social, cultural, legal environments. So we will have to take it on from a very, very different lens. And what is really, I think, heartening, I would like to say, is that this whole personhood campaign that that has been started by a few people who are active in the animal rights movement and also have a legal background. And I'd like to call out Alok Hisarwala Gupta, if you've heard of him. He's done amazing work, and I'm a super big fan of what he does. So he is, of course, working for elephants, but work like that, which and it is very species targeted, which is great, because then that particular species is getting the attention it deserves. I think one of the things that we also forget is that we cannot apply one solution to all animals. Every animal is different. Any animal has its own behaviors and its requirements. And, I think in just trying to go with one single umbrella, sometimes we also lose out on those nuances between different species. So I really appreciate that there is a focus on one species and that there is a focus on personhood. This was it Punjab, Haryana government that acknowledged animal personhood, if I'm not wrong, or was it Uttarakhand?
I think it was Haryana or Uttarakhand.
Yeah. Right. Okay. So, like one of these governments, I'm sorry, I'm a blank right now, but one of these governments has acknowledged the personhood of animals, which is amazing, which is something that, and how do we leverage that? But this happened a few years back, a couple of years back, and we haven't really capitalized on it. We haven't really done anything, on that. And going back to that whole feminist thing that I was talking about, one of the reasons why it has benefited only primarily heterosexual, primarily white, primarily educated, able-bodied and middle class, upper and middle class women was also because there was no intersectional approach used. Approaches were used legally support women in a certain community. Let's economically do something. Let's and look at the social cultural environment. And all of them were not really talking to each other. So, my theory is that one of the reasons why that has happened is because we lacked this intersectional approach. So I found this objective really interesting and very, again, a kind of a hopeful thing for me, because if we are looking at this question today, it's great because we do need all of these multiple disciplines acting in multiple sectors to help animals. We will not be, if we've not been able to help women, we will not be able to help animals if we continue to work in silos. So, and the fact that there is already some work starting in the space, in the legal space, especially in India, it's very difficult because we have antiquated laws. All of us are aware of, the whole No More 50 campaign, right? 50 rupees for an animal offense as the PC Act 1960. So what hope do we have for farm animals? So, when you look at these things, it's great to see this happening. And I would also like to call upon another person, since one of the questions later, I know I'm skipping this, Sneha, do apologize, but it's just coming to my mind right now like this, is another one whose writings are really, yeah, sorry, okay. So is Krishna Unni Hari. So Krishna Unni Hari again works on, along with Alok, I think, in this space, and his writing is absolutely amazing. The way he's spoken about elephants from a caste angle, it's again something that I really would encourage everybody to read, because then that explores the whole complexity of what is happening in India and how we need to look at animals, therefore apply that in our day-to-day animal rights space, not just in understanding how animals have been treated from a casteist angle, the casteist speciesism, but also how understanding that perspective may inform our own behavior in these spaces. So I think, those are things, these are some articles and these are some perspectives that are trying to work on the intersections of what is relevant in the Indian context. And I just thought I'd call them out. Thank you.
And I would also like to give a shout out to Krishna Unni Hari. And I have read one of his articles. It was on building alliances between anti-caste groups and anti-caste movement and animal rights movement. And I even noted down a point from his article. And I would just like to quote a few sentences from that article. And the context is about how to build animal alliances between animal rights movement and anti-caste movement. And it goes like, resisting power need not come from exercising power over those who are weaker to us. More importantly, to respond to Hindutva intrusion into private eating practices through the amplification of meat eating is to be trapped in the debate as defined by the oppressor. And it inescapably continues to trade in the violent symbol of the cow. So this is an article that was published in kafila.online. I think that's the name of that website. And all of you must read it. And a lot of what I understand about casteist speciesism today comes from this piece of writing. And another advocate who I mentioned previously, Pradeep Kumar Gautam. So I think we should be, learning a lot from people who are taking an intersectional and inclusive approach. And I also think that we need to have some, serious and dedicated research to take this cause of animal rights and veganism to marginalized communities in a very inclusive and sensitive manner. And we need to brainstorm and just think about the possible solutions that can work out, that will be viable. And not just that, we also need to, in the vegan movement, we think I think we need to give a very fair space to people who are coming from marginalized communities, because we are the ones who see how oppression is interconnected in different ways. But that is not how it is in the current animal rights movement. We are usually seen as, often seen as intruders who are just trying to change the aim, like to alter the aim of animal rights movement and make it all about anti-casteism, which is not true. We are just trying to, we're just asking you to acknowledge your personal like caste and class privileges before taking the case of animal rights to other communities, especially to the oppressed communities. That's all about it.
Yes, Sanchita, please go ahead.
So adding on to what everybody has said, I think we can all agree that one of the most potent methods of imparting a message is through films and media. And for example, we're seeing films that have like a feminist lens or an anti-capitalist lens, etc., etc. But we're yet to see, entertain. I'm not talking about documentaries. I'm talking about films that make you feel things and all of that from an anti-speciesist perspective. Perhaps one novel I can think of is Charlotte's Web, but I mean, inevitably, the main character, who is a child, is brainwashed into thinking that, exploiting animals is okay, even though she resisted it at first. So I think, that we should encourage, and if possible, if any of us have that kind of talent, to create films or short videos or music or, art to to propagate an anti-speciesist point of view. And I would really appreciate if anybody has any recommendations for films or music or artists who center anti-speciesism in their work.
I mean, I've come across a lot of documentaries and short films that highlight this idea of speciesism, or this thing that out of sight, out of mind. Like there was this documentary of like where a couple went to a restaurant and they ordered, I think, a pork dish, and then that man was called upon to just go and slaughter a pig by his own bare hands, and he was not able to do that. But I've seen just some similar short films, but not any other ones that address speciesism yet. But I have also like seen some artists on Instagram. I don't remember the names of their profiles, but even they produce artwork that highlights speciesism. So if I come across those accounts again, I'll definitely forward those to you, Sanchita.
I can think of the film Okja. It's not exactly anti-speciesist like, throughout, but it does have that point of view. Film Okja, it's on Netflix.
Are you saying Okja, that movie?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great one. That's a nice one. We also have a few recommendations in the chat section.
All right, thank you so much, everybody, for this to elaborate on this point. Is there anything else you would like to add before we move on to this next option?
No, not from my side.
Okay, all right. So the next objective we have is finding a middle ground with diverse perspectives within the movement and working towards a common goal of animal liberation. Anybody would like to add to that?
I think I already
Yeah.
said a lot of relevant points with this, relevant to this objective in the previous session,
Yes.
in the last few minutes.
Yes.
So no, I don't have
Go ahead.
anything new to add.
No problem. Yes, Devrati.
I think like someone already said, like there will be diverse perspectives within the movement, like perspectives that come from their own places of experience. And we need to think about whether the movement holds space for marginalized voices and not like in a tokenistic way, where like once in a blue moon, for example, only during Pride Month, queer vegans are approached by like big animal rights organizations to talk about queer rights and animal rights. Or like once in a blue moon, these organizations will have like one person from a marginalized caste talk about caste issues and animal rights, like while the rest of the year they are silent about it and will do this like just for brownie points and come off as intersectional. So I feel the point is to think about what are we really learning from diverse perspectives and what, like, who do we think of when we think of diversity? What are the voices that are missing from these conversations? Whose voices are not being heard? Whose stories are being tokenized? Whose experiences are invisibilized? And to like hold that sort of a space in the common goal of animal liberation as well.
That's a great point, Devrati. Thank you so much. Yes, Sanchayata.
So about middle ground, I wanted to say that obviously there's going to be diverse perspectives and there's going to be diverse methods as well when it comes to animal advocacy. But we must keep in mind that there are certain perspectives and certain methods that may not align necessarily with the animal's interests. You know, I firmly believe, as I said before, that anti-speciesism must keep animals at the forefront and at the center. And if we look at, say, a utilitarian or an animal as welfare perspective, you know, where, as I've already said, an animal can have like a good life but one bad day. I am curious to know how we can align a perspective that is rooted in reductionism and, you know, to do reduction as opposed to abolition with an annihilation of speciesism as we know it. So it's something that I'm interested in knowing. Basically, what I'm trying to say is, how do we find a middle ground between perspectives which do not have the best interests of animals in mind versus perspectives and motives that do have non-human animals' best interests in the center.
So Sanchayata, this is not my point of view, but I remember being a part of a webinar where I also raised this point of animal welfareism versus animal rights. And so this person, like so she works in the field of animal welfare, and she does all the groundwork. And she mentioned that the reason why she thinks that animal welfareism should also be given a lot of importance currently is because we as humans, we have not reached the point where we have even started seeing animals as individuals, or seeing animals as individuals who should not be put through any form of suffering or harm. So unless we have reached that stage, and we should definitely keep working on that, on reaching that should be the ultimate goal. But unless we reach that goal, we should at least try to make the lives of these already suffering animals little bit more comfortable. So this is what she explained, why she, despite believing in an abolitionist approach, she thinks that it is not really possible at the moment, and welfarism is how we should be going ahead with, while keeping the aim of abolitionism intact.
So my concern with this thing is just a concern. I'm not disregarding, what she might have said, is that capitalism works in a way, that is so slimy is the word. You'll see welfare perspectives being immediately co-opted by huge corporations. They're like, oh, see, these are free-range eggs. They're going to be $3 more because we are treating these animals kindly, so you have to pay us for that kind of kindness. So if they go to a stage where being welfareist is more profitable than the traditional methods that they're already employing, what is the guarantee, or what is the assurance that they will recognize animals as individuals? That is like what I was talking about.
Yeah, exactly. And even I have had the same concern that if we, let's say we are in that phase that we have started to treat animals, let's say, better or in a less cruel way, like all these free range eggs and chickens, or grass-fed cows and all, then is that not also going to be a very great justification for people who believe that, yeah, animals exist for us? Like they would be like, okay, so but we are already treating them in a better way, so what's the harm? So this is also one of my concerns, and I'm not sure that if a welfarist approach is actually going to work, or it's going to dismantle our speciesist prejudices and perspectives towards animals. Yeah, Manisha, over to you.
Manisha, please.
Yeah, so I think I said this earlier, where we were struggling as we were looking at how do we work in these areas and how do we involve the government, what do we do with, which will have immediate impact, because we are hungry for change. We want change to happen for animals immediately. And yes, I agree with the woman that you're citing, or I'm sorry for using the word woman, but I agree with the person that who you referred to a little earlier, where where she's saying that even in spite of having an abolitionist approach, they're working for welfare because it'll take a long time. However, there's also this concept of funding. So when we work in this space, where does the money go? I mean, in a capitalist economy, and you're looking at even if let's say you're looking at funding for your organization as an NGO, what are you using those funds for? Are you using it for a compromise where you're saying, that, okay, I am going to be working on welfare. Are you going to be using it for animal rights where, it is going to be long term? It is not going to happen immediately. And how would you justify the use of that when you see that there is an animal in a cage, when on the road that you're walking in, there is an unlicensed slaughter shop, and you pass it every day, and that particular animal is suffering, is in that cage, and you're seeing it every day? So what would you do? Would you go ahead and take some action to stop that? Is that the immediate thing? So there are many of these points that come across. And I think every organization, every individual makes these decisions based on their own understanding. And there is no, I'm sorry, I'm saying this, but I don't think there is any right way of looking at it. And in making these judgments about what is right and what is wrong, aren't we also propagating the very thing that we want to move away from, right? So, it's, yes, the animal is in pain right now. Yes, we can't say reduce the suffering. You won't say that to a human being. At the same time, there exists a legislation which can help you get relief for that animal immediately. Would you rather use that? Or would you put your resources into working on something which is not going to work even in 10 years from now or 11 years from now, but you need to make a start somewhere? So, I think it's a balance of this. And as long as we are working on every little aspect of that, that's how we've resolved this in Samayu. We're working on every little aspect of all of this. It's complex, but it needs to be done. So we don't go with one or the other. We use a mix of approaches to make sure that we are satisfying the personal approaches, the organizational approaches, thinking in this field, marrying the rights and animal welfare perspective in ways that is accommodating of all of these views along the spectrum from one end to the other. And so this means that there are some of us who are very passionately for abolitionism in the team. There are some of us who believe that welfare has to be done. And I think by encouraging a dialogue amongst us and looking at each of these from a very contextual perspective, what is going to work right now, we are trying to somehow work in that intersectional accommodation and making sure short-term impact and long-term concerns are kind of balanced. That might mean, for example, that our messaging is pro-urban elite. It is very targeted towards an educated elite urban customer whom we are saying, you have the money, don't spend that money on chicken, spend it on vegan foods instead. Our communication might be targeted and not so visible. So what is visible on our social media will be this, because who's on social media? Who's looking at that Insta channel? It's people who are mostly educated, right? How do we come up with better means of communication, those kind of videos which would be in regional dialects, which people are forwarding to each other, which become viral, which are very contextual, local, Kannada, Telugu, those kind of things, Hindi, Bengali, Assamese. Are we there yet? No, but we need to move towards that. So we need to look at our content also evolving in those ways that we can send those messages, in different language formats, in different ways, in a more cultural, regional, relevant context. That is one. Second, while we are doing that, we should not miss out on the opportunity to target the educated urban elite with money, who is spending that money and propagating consumer demand for products which are for animal food. So things like that is how we have resolved it, and we are continuously thinking, talking, evolving a common language that we can push to other people. I think one of the other things that we have to be also kind of careful of is that when we are very, very and I've seen this in myself, and so I'm calling it out for myself, that when one is very invested in justice, right? I want justice for this cause. I want justice for this. We should be very careful that that is also nuanced and it doesn't become an injustice to somebody else. And I think that's what happens when in our WhatsApp groups and things, and somebody's saying, I am, like, you can't use this language. It is anti-feminist language. And this person says, let's kill this discussion here, take it offline, because, what we are focused on is animal rights and let's not discuss it here, right? So that's what happens, because you're like, maybe you're becoming so too invested into the cause and you're losing your objectivity. And so, you are again propagating some form of speciesism, which is relevant in the human context. The other isms, right? I think racism, all of that is speciesism in some way, like different, sorry for really confusing things here, but it's the same thing which you apply to speciesism. It also applies to humans and different types of humans from different races, ethnicities, genders, ages, etc. So when we do this, when we take these hard stances on issues, what we are doing is we are also at that moment negating the hard work possibly that somebody else has done to bring relief to that animal in that moment. We are, by not listening, I think one of the questions is today on open listening, I remember somewhere. So I think one of the ways in which we have tried to accommodate this in finding common ground, the middle ground, is trying to practice open listening first within the team about animal rights, animal welfare, speciesism, etc. First, practice it internally. We're still in the process. We are supposed to have evolved a glossary by now. We haven't. We are just starting off. And the other is that when we are doing our work on the field, for social justice, for environment, for climate action, talking to our partners there, we are very respectful of their individual mandates. We are not, like forcing our agenda. So we are not going there from, we are in it only for animals perspective. We are looking at how is it that we build up a common goal with you that benefits both the communities that you're working for and the animals that are part of the communities. A lot of the times that means that we could be going the welfare way. And are we going to be pushing that maybe to some other organizations, collaborating with other organizations that are active in welfare? Will we take up the work ourselves? Will we do, is that the way we want to go? Not sure. One thing that we have done is that we look at any measure that will immediately improve the animal. So not, for example, free range eggs, but can we use, for example, One Health, so that farmers understand that they have to provide proper food and water and proper hygiene, and not keep animals with the stocking densities that they are currently invested in. Is that something that we should be looking at? Should we, in pushing the government to do this One Health training, can we improve their lives immediately at this point of time? Yeah, so sorry, that's about it. I will stop.
Thank you so much, Manisha, and everybody else for sharing such insightful perspectives. Is there anything else you would like to add, anybody else, before we move on to another objectives? Yes, Namrata, please go.
Yeah. So I'm just looking at the question that we have in front of us, reaching a middle ground. I'm coming in again with the perspective of media. When I say media, I'm talking specifically about the press. And to reach a middle ground with them, there needs to be a whoever is presenting a certain view, whether it's through an opinion article or a press release or an event or sort of a legal representation, you are very clear about what is it that you are standing for. At that point in time, you have to break away from that role and get into the other person's shoes and look at how they are going to understand this. Because we over here have an understanding of the work that we are doing, the other person does not. And therefore, it is important to actually design your communication in a way that they would understand. And why, so this is something that Manisha has just mentioned, actually, that there are times when you become very sort of hard on what is it that we want to represent, and that just doesn't take us anywhere, because then it's just sort of whatever that we are, the communication that we are trying to send out is just shot down, because we are being very hard on the stance that we are taking. So that's one bit that is there, and I'm sure that Sanchita has also the pieces that you write, there are times, I mean, you are interacting with editors, you know it very well, that there is a certain bit of modification that is required. And so one thing that is important is that we need to, from all aspects, there needs to be outreach that happens from all aspects that are there, whether it is political, policy related, legal, or just sort of a more feature lifestyle kind of communication that we can make with the end users, for that matter. And so we have to do all of it together. So it depends on what kind of an organization or what is the work that you are doing individually or as a part of an organization. These things will have to be done together. And one thing that's very important for the movement to have is enough content and reliable, credible content that is India centric. Often a lot of information that we are using to support our our viewpoints is international resources, right? Because the conversation on veganism, on animal rights, and everything has reached different level in other countries, but we are not there yet. And in some, this is what I've heard from a lot of people working for animals, is that from a legal standpoint, obviously things are better in India from a rights point of view, because of the way the the rights are established. So it's important that we that's what I'm saying, that we have to sort of do a multi-pronged entry into getting our word out. And so yeah, that's what I'm saying.
And
So
since
much,
we have been
Namrata.
talking,
Yes. Yeah. Yes,
since
Namrata,
we're
please go
talking
on.
about media, I think even these films and series on Netflix and all, even they present veganism and vegans as something that has to do with being classy, being very exclusive. Like for instance, there's a Netflix series called Sex Education. Even there, it is portrayed as something like, today we are vegans and today we are just eating salads and leafy green vegetables, and these are the characters who are the most popular ones, the elite ones, the exclusive ones who people are even afraid to talk to. And there are several such examples. And even when I have such discussions with people, even when I just present veganism or the term veganism, just instantly people have this perception that, oh my god, it is something classy and something so expensive, because what comes to their mind is directly consumption of soy milk, consumption of almond milk, buying mock meat, etc. And they come across these headlines of this and this Hollywood or Bollywood celebrity trying out a vegan diet for a week, or this celebrity was an ex-vegan or something like that. And I've seen that these perceptions are hugely impacted by how media in any form they present veganism and vegans. And they like I even said this about like half an hour ago, that media rarely presents veganism as what it is about and who it is about. It rarely talks about non-human animals. It has made veganism completely about vegans. And even the news articles that we come across, majorly we'll see that it comes from organizations like news organizations that cover animal rights exclusively, like Sentient Media. And even Namrata mentioned that, yeah, we have to make certain modifications when we are writing an article and we are expecting it to get published by certain publications. Like even using the word they for animals, or her for animals, for cows and all. They may object to it, the editor may object to it, and they would rather prefer the usage of the term it to refer to the animals and not any other pronouns. So there have been many modifications that have to be made in order to even get a story out. And it's not easy when we cover animal rights, because it's like if I want it to be read as in an anti-species tone, then the editor might not agree with it. The editor might want me to add on things like how it benefits humans. Again, going back to anthropocentrism, what is in it for us? What is in it for humans? Is plant-based diet even beneficial for humans? Is it beneficial for pregnant women? So again, if I'm writing a story on animals and if I'm looking forward to getting it published by an organization that publishes several other stories on different issues, they may want me to just not take that anti-speciesist approach. I'm not saying that it happens every time, but it really is there. It happens a lot of times. It has happened with me as well. Yeah, that's about it.
Thank you so much, Sanchita. Anybody else, or shall we move on to the next points? I think we are quite behind time, so if we can just move on to the next objectives. Sorry, just give me a minute.
We can.
Yeah, sure. So the fifth and sixth objectives are quite similar and overlap each other. Fifth one is developing resources on these issues for activists, volunteers, and other animal advocates to educate themselves on the nuances of the animal rights movement specific to India, and focusing on solution-based approaches that can draw potential projects and/or initiatives that can be incorporated on the ground. So I think there's like a good overlap between building the resources first and then also focusing on the solutions on how we can take these resources out in the real world and help that as a dissemination project and educate other people as well. Yeah, thank you so much. If anybody would like to take ahead. Ankur, Devrati, anybody, Sanchayata?
I think I've already mentioned some many relevant points.
Sure, no worries. Sanchayata, would you like to go ahead? Yeah.
Yeah, so in terms of resources, I would really like to encourage translation of already existing anti-speciesist literature into regional languages, such as in Bangla, Marathi, Kannada, and yeah, so that needs to be done. And also, I think as Bahujans, me and like Sanchita and Ankur, we are kind of used to the animosity we face from upper caste people when advocating for our rights. You mentioned reservations, you mentioned Dr. Ambedkar. And so what I'm trying to get here is that if we are to propagate a message, which is directly against the interests of people who are interested in preserving species structures, then we must be willing to, what to say, quote unquote, hurt their feelings, to, and in fact, like the people we'll be interacting with in the Zoom meeting itself, we belong to a particular class group who have had access to education. And I think we shouldn't like place human feelings at the forefront as a solution, I think, because it has not been done in the case of any other social justice movement. And if possible, we should try to do the same thing in terms of animal rights as well. And another thing I want to add is people are very quick to disregard veganism, especially because, oh my God, how is it going to reach the working class? How are you going to make sure that poor people are going to go vegan? I want to argue in that case that feminism, anti-casteism, even they have barely reached the true working class of India. We are easily the top 5-10% of the country. So if we are not disregarding these movements based on how they have not reached the working class, we can't do the same with veganism as well. In terms of practical solutions, I believe that food security in India, we are a deeply agrarian country, so we really have to look at how grains and other plant-based food is being hoarded and wasted every year to an unimaginable degree, and we must make way for these resources to reach the people who need them. That's what.
Yeah, and like we should be acknowledging the fact that there are existing challenges, and in fact there are going to be many more challenges as we try to transition from this system to a system that is not dependent so heavily on animals or at all on animals. But again, what I see is that these challenges, the systemic challenges, are exploited by speciesist people in order to dismiss veganism and the idea behind it, to dismiss anti-speciesism. But that doesn't happen with the other movements, as you just mentioned, Sanchita just mentioned. And I agree that even the vegan movement in India is again dominated by upper caste and upper class people. But that doesn't mean that it's the idea behind veganism should be dismissed. We do not do the same with feminism. When we critique Savarna feminism, we do not dismiss the idea of feminism overall. We just resist to this movement of Savarna feminism, but we are okay with, we go ahead with feminism. But that is not what I see when it comes to veganism, because people who are just, because there are many people, and I just want to highlight that there are many people who are just looking for excuses to continue the exploitation of animals from their end. They even use like our communities, they use Dalit communities as their shield to continue their behavior that involves the exploitation of animals in several ways. Like, saying that, there is going to be a homeless person on the street who will not be able to afford soy milk or almond milk, and this is why I am going to walk into KFC and have KFC. Now that is something very dishonest, and it's a complete mockery of anti-speciesism, animal rights, veganism, and basically everything that animals are made to go through. So I see a lot of dishonesty, a lot of hypocrisy, and it's so exhausting to the point that I do not even want to engage in certain dialogues anymore. It's been more than 5 years since I've been a vegan, and I've now learned to filter out these types of people who I see that they are not here to actually learn and see how we can navigate through the current system, but they're just here to troll and dismiss it in any way, even if it involves the tokenization of marginalized communities like Dalit communities. Yeah, that's about it. I don't have anything else to share, I guess.
Yes, Devrati. Thank you, Sanjay.
I think in terms of resources, like especially for new people who have turned vegan recently, or like new vegans, it becomes really important to also think about what are the kind of resources that we are consuming on veganism, who has it been developed by it, and such things. Because like 8 years ago when I became vegan, it took me great effort to even filter through a lot of resources that are more visible, but that are very like single issue and reduce veganism to a consumer activity, because these are the resources that are very easily available. But I think like over the years, I've learned how it's really important to learn these things from work that has been done by people belonging to marginalized communities themselves, and to look at some of the strategies that they suggest for making the movement more meaningful, centering the issue of speciesism, and also recognizing how very fundamental consistent anti-oppression is to the vegan movement. And on solutions, I think solution does not just mean like the number of people who become vegan, and it does not just mean a new policy or like a reduction in the number of animals that are harmed. Uh, like it could be all of that, but it is also about whether people are starting to see the fact that non-human animals experience oppression, understanding these power structures, these systems, and also reflecting on individual human privilege and actions that oppress other animals. And even these understandings are very important, and starting these conversations are also solutions, I feel. More people knowing about the politics of veganism, more people knowing about speciesism, these are also solutions. And I really feel like making this knowledge accessible and available, relatable, that is very important, where like conversations can be a starting point.
Thank you, Devrati. Yes, Manisha, please go ahead.
Yeah, I completely agree and resonate with what Debarati said just now. And I'll also, so I'm not going to repeat that, but I totally, completely, agree with that. Also with what Sanchita's points were made. Just that I'm going back to one point which Namrata had made a little while back about research. I think one of the critical resources which is missing, she's absolutely right to point that out, is India-based research. And that is important, I think, also as an emerging solution. It's not a solution currently, but we need to develop, we need to do more research to be able to therefore justify these articles, the data, what we are writing, and also to do research really for two things, advocacy to in the policy realm and media advocacy. So these two things are really, really critical. Consumer advocacy keeps happening. We are all talking about it, and we are all a little frustrated with that how it's all very consumer angle oriented. But I think it's important as well. It's helping shape the demand in some ways. So like Namrata said, another thing that I really resonated with earlier in terms of solutions is multi-pronged solutions at every level. Do what we, the niches that we are in, what we're skilled at, we do that really well, and we appreciate when people are doing other things, and we make sure that there is dialogue between us. Those people who are focusing on one area are talking to people who are focusing on another area. So this is where, the conversations, the dialogues that Debrati was talking about earlier makes sense. So I really don't have much to add in terms of these, because it's already been beautifully covered by everyone before. But just to emphasize that I think research required for policy and media advocacy, and this conversations and dialogues that we need to continue to have, and we need to develop and evolve as a movement through these dialogues. I think, like closed secular, I'm sorry, saying secular, closed and conversations where we don't invite people to listen openly, to have conversations with each other, even when we don't agree with them. Let's say that, somebody is coming, and I'm saying this again, someone is coming from a reductionist approach, someone is coming from an abolitionist approach. It's okay to have very, very entrenched, deep mindsets in both of them and be totally passionately supportive of whatever stance you have. But to treat that as a means of alienation and isolation, I think is not the way that the movement will go. So we need to have very inclusive dialogues and discussions between each other and learn to respect even where we really passionately disagree. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks, Neil.
Thank you so much, Manisha, for summing that up. Is there anybody else who would want to add to that point? Or anything
So,
else?
Sneha, I have I've prepared a list of recommendations. Like it has some links to some articles and podcasts and videos. So I'll just share that in the chat box, and
Oh, yes, please. Yes.
everyone can access this.
Yes, please. Yes. That would be great. Yeah. Anybody who would like to go through those resources again that Sanchita will post it now, please copy them because then you won't have access to it. But I'll also
it's open access.
No, okay. From the chat box, the link may not be accessible
Okay,
later on.
Yeah, sorry.
No worries.
Yeah, and I would also like to add on to this point that I think the organizations like that work for animal rights should also come ahead in supporting animal rights advocates that are doing some good work in different fields, like fields of writing, journalism, or even art for that matter, or anything else. So like even FIAPO has a fellowship program, and which Ria and I are also a part of, and I'm very happy to be a part of it. So they support journalists and writers to come up with stories about farmed animals, and this is one such initiatives to support animal rights advocates that really want to speak about what's happening to the animals, keeping inclusivity in mind. And there's another this US-based non-profit news organization called Sentient Media. I also mentioned it previously. Even they do a very fabulous job in providing mentorship and very rich courses and guidance to animal rights advocates who want to like basically who are writers or journalists or just want to spread the word about anti-speciesism and animal rights. So I really admire the work as well. I think we need more such organizations in India to come up with mentorship and training animal rights advocates in different ways.
Thank you, Sanchita. Yeah, Devrati, I think they dropped out. They have some other commitments to get to, so they've left the event. Yeah. So since we are almost out of time, it's 2 p.m. But there are a couple of questions. If everybody's okay to maybe give 5-10 more minutes, and then we can take up some questions and then wrap it up. Is that okay? You can just give me like a thumbs up on the screen as well.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
Can I just come in?
Yes, sure. Yes, Amrita.
So I'll just quickly say a few pointers that I have in mind, and I won't be able to stay back for the Q&A session.
Yes.
Yeah. So one is that oftentimes what happens is that when there was somebody who said this before. I don't remember who was it who made the point that I think it was Sanchita. She said that it is the hypocrisy when you don't. I mean, you're talking about the availability of nutrition through animal products for people who come from poorer backgrounds, and what about them? And I know we've interacted with so many journalists who said so many so many times that what is that person going to do and what is that person going to do and everything. So that's definitely there. What exists is a lack of acceptance of the fact that you are consuming animal products because you like the flavor, you like the taste, you want to consume that. So it is not about nutrition, it is not. So that is a primary sort of misconception that needs to be brought about clearly in the face. While we do that, we have to be sensitive to the fact that we don't do it in a preachy or a self-righteous kind of a manner. So we have to be very delicate and very polite when we are making these conversations, because in the case of the press, the first hindrance that we hit itself is the journalist that you're talking to or the editor that you're talking to, because they themselves are going to be like, listen, I don't believe in what you're saying. So that's one. The other is, it's very important for us to, and I've made this point earlier, that it's very important for us to actually have credible information and not something that is based on emotions alone. And I'm saying emotions because this is what comes often to us from the other side. So we can't only make emotional arguments. We have to have solid, sort of credible information with us to present to the party in front of us, to make them believe in what we are saying. And therefore, there needs to be focused attention that needs to be given into, and Manisha has said that this may happen at a later point in time, but there needs to be a dedicated budget that is set aside for research and for dissemination of that research as well. So that's something that is critical. And the another point that I often feel is that we might be missing onto, or maybe I think that it's being missed onto, is that while we are talking about going towards the plant-based alternatives and the plant-based food systems and all, what we are missing out is when all of this alternate sort of the alternate capitalistic organizations that are coming up, which are selling the A2 cow milk, which is free range, and the eggs and the chicken that is antibiotic free. So they are actually countering, they are being proactive in countering all of that, what we are saying, that there is chemical, there is hormone, there's mistreatment, and so they are countering all of that at multiple levels. And there is an entire industry that has been set in place now, which I see a lot of people who are the target audience for this communication that we are having today, that are turning to those, the A2 milk and the free range milk and everything, and the eggs and chicken and all that. They are really moving to all of that because they are like, this is good for my health, this is good for environment, and this whatever. So I have a feeling that for some reason, all of that is getting missed out on. Nobody is actually putting a critical eye on that. Somebody needs to actually go after unveiling what is the truth. If it is really humane, if it is really chemical free, antibiotic free, I don't know. So that is another aspect that needs to be covered when we are talking about research. So because that industry, by the time we are tackling these issues of the political, religious and everything, is going to become very huge. And then, that will be a bigger demon to deal with.
Yes, totally. I agree. I agree with you, Namrata. But again, with this term humane treatment of animals, I think like how so many of us see it as like just not using animals, and there can never be a humane way to use animals. But many people look at it as, human way should be about like not tying cows uh, for longer periods of time, or letting letting the babies of the cow to get her milk more often, or just keeping them roaming and not just restricted to a certain space. So yeah, I think people are very much willing to look for ways in which they feel a little less guilty about using animals in any ways, like I just mentioned, like using marginalized communities as their shield to continue their personal behaviors of exploiting animals, just making any sort of bizarre argument and thinking of it as truth and nothing but the truth. I think that's very problematic. I agree that there is this challenge of making challenge of accessibility, but that the accessibility, when we talk about it, is in terms of making plant-based nutritious foods affordable and accessible to every marginalized communities as well. And we are not talking about our intention is not to talk about making these exclusive vegan labeled products like mock meat and soy milk and almond milk available for different levels levels of the society. But I just feel like, I must sound very pessimistic, but I feel that people are just very dishonest, and sometimes it just takes away any hope that I have in me that there will be a time when people are going to look at animals as individuals, because they're just too busy in looking for excuses at how they can, push away the guilt they have with using animals, if they even consider animals as individuals to begin with.
Right.
Thank you, Namrata and Sanchita, for your points. Is there anything else that you would want to discuss? Can we move on to Q&A? Because it's almost 2:10. So might want to. Okay, so we'll take the question. We received one question from one of the participants. What would be some of the imperfect but practical ways to move forward?
Yes, so I can start. So I will peg this question against the solutions that I was talking about earlier, which is, say, for example, for research. So what we did was, funding is very difficult to get for in the space of farmed animal advocacy. I'm speaking from an organizational point of view. And because I work with an organization, I'm speaking, from my experience with Samayu. So, you can get funding from a lot of the communities that are generally HNI, etc. That's the primary source of funding in the animal space. And, you can get that for direct impact on animals, for shelters, etc., etc. When it comes to funding for farmed animals, very difficult to get. Yes, then the funding is available internationally. But getting funding for research, that's like almost impossible. So it's really, really difficult to get, funding for research because, and in India, I think we are still in the nascent stages of exploring it, but we decided that irrespective of how difficult it is, we have to go ahead and do that. So the practical way to start this is to try and do events which help people get closer to the cause of animals, showcase this, come up with white papers, send this to as many people as possible. It may not be perfect in the sense that we are not really achieving direct impact right now, but it is definitely practical in the sense that we are laying out data that is coming from the field, that is India based, that is local, that is contextual, and then we showcase that to to the government. One of the other aspects of the imperfection of this is using existing legislation to improve, and this could be then construed as welfareism, right? So where we say, for example, we stop more aquaculture farms from coming up. So what we do is we use the data that we've collected, showing that this is an environmental this is against the pollution, the PCB, pollution control board's regulations, or the state pollution control boards. It is violating this because there's runoff from this farm, it is polluting water bodies, things like that. Like you collect data around that and then you showcase it to the government. And then you make sure that with this, any farms that are violating this get closed, and new farms that come up have to go ahead and do the whole process of, by making these facts come out, what we're doing is we're showing other farms that need to be set up will have to follow these norms. So it's not really perfect. We stop some farms, but we're also telling other farms that here is the legal way of going about getting more farms, because you will avoid these pitfalls. But then we are making it difficult also for them to set up, because it won't be as easy as just going ahead and converting your paddy farm into an aquaculture farm. So this is one way of doing it, a practical but imperfect way of doing it. And hopefully by the time we get to this, no other farms think about setting it up, because we have also in that space worked on media advocacy to show that this is not really helping the farmers. The aquaculture farmers are not benefiting from having their paddy fields converted into aquaculture farms. In the long run, it has only hurt them. They're doing research that shows the socio-economic and agricultural economics behind that to support this claim that they get less revenue. We are also talking to farmers to understand what is the impact and what are the alternative ways in which they can then shift. So we're not ignoring the needs of the marginalized communities, because we are looking at also what is the shift, what is the alternative, what do the farmers do if they're not doing aquaculture? Can they go back to paddy farms? They can't, because the land, the soil is all polluted and desalinated right now. So what would be other alternatives? We are exploring that again with the help of research. And then we also work with the government to propagate simultaneously, while not focusing on aquaculture, plant-based methods of production. So for example, millet, it's the year of the millets this year. So we work with the government, we tell them, please, let's go ahead and push these. What are the ways in which marginalized communities can benefit from plant-based methods of production? And this is where our work has been concentrated so far. And while we are doing this, we haven't yet started media advocacy, because our research, like I said, it takes time, you get funding, then you start the research. So meanwhile, what we've been doing is we are using consumer advocacy as another way, another practical but imperfect way of doing this. So we are not targeting marginalized communities and telling them change your nutrition patterns right now, give up what you're eating, and adopt veganism. We can't do that because we're coming from a place of privilege. So we target the urban elite instead, and we tell them that these are the ways in which you can shift. You can do it. You have the capacity right now. You have the money. Go ahead. These are the alternatives that are there in the market. Meanwhile, we get these products subsidized so that they become cheaper. We work with the government to use existing incentives to ensure subsidies are shifting from animal agriculture to plant-based agriculture towards plant-based alternatives, so that these become cheaper in the market and eventually available to all strata of society. So that's the ways we're going about it to answer that question.
Manisha, did you also talk about helping those farmers who are currently dependent on animals to help them get beyond it, like
Yes.
to transition from this mode of employment or occupation
Yes.
to some
Yes, we have a research project that we are currently funding for. We are trying to get funds for that. And we've showcased that in a fundraising event we did in Bangalore recently. We call it the Alternative Livelihoods Project, where we're trying to see how can we shift specifically poultry and aquaculture farmers to so we are looking at that angle as well. We are not just pushing consumer demand, but we are looking at how is it that the communities will benefit from it. So it's like complex, I said, but we really believe in this multi-pronged, multidisciplinary, multi-sectoral approach, because I don't think things are going to work, beyond that.
And I think, in the Indian context, when we talk about helping farmers or other people who are currently dependent on animals for their employment, I think we should also primarily discuss slaughterhouse workers and tannery workers, because the jobs that they're doing are not out of choice. It has been forced upon them since generations, and no matter how much they wish to leave these jobs, they are not even accepted in any other jobs. There's this startup called Fool, PHOOL. They employ women, and most of these women from marginalized communities, and most of these women have worked as
Sanchita, your voice is breaking. Screen is frozen. Hey, Sanchita, hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I think my internet connection is unstable. That is what it shows.
Yeah, we missed a couple of sentences in the last few seconds.
Okay, so basically, like in sum, I was saying that we should also consider helping slaughterhouse workers and tannery workers in the leather factories who have been forced into this system of relying on animals for their employment. And these people are majorly from marginalized communities. So, of course, they're not willing to, they would not want to do this job, but they do not have any other choice. So we should definitely keep them intact when we wish to go ahead with helping people like farmers to transition to non-animal based sources of employment. And I also talked about this startup called Fool. Was it audible at that time? Sneha?
Yeah, no, that was audible when you started talking about asking Manisha about the alternative livelihood project. Yeah, that was audible for all of us. Thank you.
Yeah, so even that startup, like it doesn't involve getting women who have been
I
involved
think
in.
Sanchita's screen is frozen, but just to reiterate, she was talking about Fool, which is an organization that employs people from marginalized communities. We might have used
Hello, Manisha, your screen's frozen as well. Yeah, okay, all right. Sorry, there was some internet issue, I guess. Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I was just trying to summarize about Fool that Sanchita was talking about, employing people of marginalized communities. They make these incense sticks from temple flowers, etc. So initiatives like that, I think, are really laudable. Yeah, just commenting on that. Are there any other questions, Neha?
Yes, sorry, there are a few, but since we're way past time, I think I would like to just ask one question, just like kind of collaborating all the questions together. And as a vegan activist who has been doing this for about 7 years, what are the ways that my advocacy can make be inclusive, and my when I am out on the street and talking to people, what are the different ways, if you can suggest that we ensure that we don't exclude certain communities and certain identities from our advocacy, because that happens a lot in India right now. One of the mainstream of activism is the street outreach, protests, and marches that we do. So this happens in a lot of other cities, and even if there are few activists or just 3-4 activists who are getting together and doing this kind of activism. But what I have observed, it's usually built on health and environment, like just all the other things that we discussed in earlier. But how do I ensure that my activism also justifies and make sure that all the other oppressions are also highlighted, and that we talk about it, and then we give that space so that we can converse people on that level as well. If there are any steps, any tools that we can use, because that's where I feel that a lot of our communication lags behind.
So that was supposed to be a question, like extension of question or something.
Yeah, it's just an extension of question of how, as an individual activist, we can do. I mean, we talked about from a larger level, and we talked about a lot of other things that but as an individual as well, if I'm talking to another activist, and maybe that person does not have the same strategy or same way of advocacy that's anti-speciesist and that's anti-oppressive. So how do we communicate that? And even with strangers who are non-vegans that we communicate on the street, are there any specific ways that we can communicate, or do you think should come off more naturally, and we need to focus on the justice and the oppression part, and not that you need to stop consuming animals? Yeah, I hope I was clear. I didn't confuse you further.
I'm not very confused, but I'll just try to think about this. In the meantime, if anyone wants to go ahead and answer this, can do so, please.
I can just try. So, from an activism perspective, when you're going, so there are many groups currently, I think, that say that please be abolitionist in your approach when you're going for outreach, right? So please be abolitionist in your approach, and please don't use reductionist language, etc., etc. So those kind of norms are all there. I think what is not stressed so that covers the anti-speciesism, etc., those angles, right? Because then it raises questions about, okay, if somebody doesn't know, a new activist doesn't know about abolitionism, then that. But I think this question is more from somebody who spent 8 years now doing activism and is thinking of, how do they do this better, is how I understood this, or how in better in the sense, how do they do it in a way that is inclusive, the topic of our conversation today. I think the first thing to do, this is where I started myself, was to educate myself. I think that's very important. I need to be really informed and educated about what is happening in this space right now, about what is the spectrum of intersectionality that we are looking at. Be mindful of the fact that there are ways in which I might offend someone without realizing, and finding somebody who's already in it, who's already aware and understands, and using them as somebody to go to check whether, to check my privilege, to see whether I'm, being in any way not appropriate in my behavior or in my conversations. And practicing that oneself, through this education, through this building awareness, through understanding, through reading articles, which is why I think it's great that this session spoke about resources. And people have posted some resources that people can go through. So I think, educating yourself. Currently, I don't think we have any resources available, which is like a list of, unlike, like we have vegan cookbooks and recipes and things like that. I don't think we have that kind of a laundry list available for this. We should hopefully in future develop more content around this as more people start talking, as they write, and media and journalism really plays a very important role. So happy, therefore, to have such discussions today with Sanchita and Namrata on the panel. So I think, those are the ways in which we've got to do it. And just for now, in a practical way, finding someone who's already there and can therefore support you in that journey. That's how I would answer that.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Manisha. I think, Sanchita, you wanted to add something on that?
No, nothing different than what Manisha has already said.
Okay, great. All right. Thank you so much, panelists. Thank you so much, Sanchita, Manisha, Ankur. I'm sorry, Namrata, Dibrati, and Sanjayita already left because they had previous commitments. So we have, there's no more questions unless there's anybody specific who would want to speak or who would want to share something on the chat box. We can give 5 minutes more tops. But if there's none, then we have come to the end of our forum. I would really hosting you all. I'm sorry if there were any glitches or if we ran out of time. So thank you so much for being patient with me and just joining me here.
Sneha, I just realized that the link that I shared for that list of recommendations, I just shared it with one of the participants. So I just reshared it right now. So in case anyone wants to copy the link, it's accessible to everyone. You can also comment on the document if you want. Even if anyone wants to add any other resources to that document, please let me know. You can even comment on that document. So yeah, that's about it. You can please just copy that link. It's a very short list, but we can even add more and more as we move ahead. And thank you so much, Sneha, and like Animal Alliance Asia for bringing us all together at one platform. I rarely see it happening, so see it happen soon. Thank you, Sneha.
Thank you, Manisha. My pleasure. Yes. Thank you, Ankur.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Manisha. Thank you, everybody, to be here. Yes, Manisha, please. Yes, go ahead.
I was just saying thank you, everyone. Sorry.
No, it's no.
Spoke over you. Yeah.
No, thank you so much for being here. I'll keep in touch. It would be great to continue to work with you all and see how we can build this animal rights movement even further and strengthen the movement. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you have a great Sunday and take care. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye. Take care.